Well, welcome everyone. My name is Marcia Fraser. I'm the Special Collections Librarian here at Williamson County Public Library. And I invite you all to come up. A lot of you, I've seen you upstairs in the Special Collections Department, and I'd love to see some new faces up there too. We specialize in genealogy and local history. So come on up, and you might even find yourself up there sometime. One guy just said, I went up there and I found myself in the yearbook. So you just never know what you're going to find in special collections. Sometimes we can pull the rabbit out of the hat for you, sometimes not. But we're so looking forward to this presentation today. Rick has a new book out at home with working folks in Williamson County. And this just delights me so much because I just have a great interest in regular folks and how they live their lives and where they live their lives. So, and he and Caneta Hankins have teamed up on this book, and Caneta has provided the architectural knowledge of the homes in this wonderful book. So you also have her expertise as well. So a lot of these structures apparently are still standing, so that makes it even more interesting. The books are for sale. They're $20 each, and Rick has brought a case of them with him today. And for those of you who are watching this on WCTV, you can send a check for $20 to the Williamson County Historical Society, made out to WCHS at P.O. Box 71, Franklin, Tennessee 37065. $20. Now that includes your postage, so that's a steal and a deal. So a great Christmas present too. So without any further ado, I'm going to welcome Rick to the podium, and we look forward to this. Rick, thank you.
Well, what a great crowd. We had about 45 last night, and the weather wasn't too good, and it's even worse today, and you all showed up, so I'm very gratified. Sunday, we're going to do it again for the Williamson County Historical Society. And the purpose in this, I don't know if some of you were at an earlier talk, how these came about. I was going through my photographs about a year ago and trying to group them in such a way, they're all on Flickr, but sometimes I have a difficult time of remembering where they are. And I noticed as I was kind of categorizing them, I had a stack of photographs, that the ones you're seeing here, that were of some of great homes that I'd used in books that we did on the First District, on the Leapers Fork books, the Triune book, in the College Grove book. And so I thought, what if I went through and pulled out 100? If you notice these books that we've been doing, there are 104 pages. And we get about 300 of them made. And my goal is we sell enough to pay for the printing, because I do give a lot of books away. The libraries get some, and friends, individuals that I know maybe can't afford the $20. But this is not a money-making deal, but I would like to get back the money that we've put in printing these. This is, I think, a worthy project, because years from now, people may not even have any knowledge of where these houses are. So I took this project on. You know, last year at this time I did the book on the pictorial history of the square. Then we did a book, Walk Down West Main Street. Then we did a book on rural scenes. And this will be the working folks' homes. And then I've got one more that's ready, but I'll save it to the spring, because I don't want y'all to save up your $20. I know it's hard. Social Security's not going up any. And it's going to be on I'm dealing with the north and east side of the square. Everything on that side of town, everything north and east of the square. And that's First Avenue, Second Avenue, North Margin, South Margin, and Church Street, Bridge Street. And I've just been amazed of how much information was there to glean. So that's coming up in probably the spring. And so we'll get on with this. Now, we put this together, I had to put it together in a PowerPoint, and I asked Caneta, my friend, and a partner in crime in some things we've worked on, and so I knew she had much more expertise in describing the architecture of some of these homes you're going to be seeing. And it really is a evolution of some of these homes. You can see just by the different materials used. And she was very kindly agreed to say yes, and then she took my work and corrected all the things that needed to be corrected, because, you know, I'm not a writer. Do the best I can, but she had a little more professionalism to it. So what we're going to do, this is going to be kind of a tag team situation. We did this last night and it worked very well. So we're going to try it again. Caneta, you ready to maybe give an overview of what you think we need to be looking for?
Do this.
Sure.
Work
Okay.
for everybody and for our TV friends too. Good afternoon. I am Caneta Skelley Hankins, a 7th generation Williamson County-an, and I'm delighted to see all of y'all this afternoon. The weather is certainly a challenge today, but thank you for coming, and we're going to move right into this so that you will not feel that your afternoon is wasted, and I hope you will enjoy this. So we start out and we will end with this marvelous piece of log architecture, and we'll wait to the end and Rick will tell you a little bit more about that. Oh, where did it go?
Oh, I bet that was the last one. Let's see, let me get on here and get this thing back to where we need to go.
Sorry, technical.
I hope we're not back where we were.
Okay, let's try it and see.
Oh, no.
There you go.
Okay. I've had the pleasure, when I first went out to Hillsborough in 1971, the second year in 72, I had to teach 2 classes of Tennessee history. And the book was not very good, and I was trying to get the children to know more about their communities. And I had them covered of kind of all the communities around Hillsborough except Bingham. And so I asked one of the teachers that I knew grew up down there, I said, who in Bingham can tell me some history about that community? And they said, oh, you got to go to Miss Nan Chapman. She's lived there all her life, and she was in her 80s then. And so after school, Glenna took me down and introduced me to Miss Nan, as she was known throughout the community. And we struck up a marvelous friendship. And she was the same age as my grandmother, but there was just night and day difference. My grandmother was almost illiterate and raised 9 children. And Miss Nan went to college at Boscobel in Nashville, and she was very sophisticated, and she had no children. But she had a wit about her that was just remarkable. And I learned more about not only Bingham, but Williamson County due to this lady right here. I must tell a story about her to give you an example of her wit. Many times after church, Elaine would cook dinner, and so we'd go by and pick up Nan coming back home, and she lived across the river from us, and so we'd have lunch. And this particular day, Elaine had made blackberry cobbler, and she's a very good one, of course. She's good at it. And so Nan was getting the very end of the dish, and she out and said, if God made anything better than sex and blackberry cobbler, he kept it for himself. Well, you can imagine, I mean, my grandmother, you know, would just never said anything like that. And so here's this sophisticated lady coming out with something so comical. So that's why she's very dear to me, and I think of her every day. But this is her when she was 10 years old. She raised this steer, brought it to town, and sold it for $200. She took that money and bought a lot. No, she put it in the bank, the old National Bank there on the square. And in about 1925, a lot on Boyd Mill Pike before you get to Warner Park, or where Warner Park is today. Nan took the $200 out of the bank and went down and bought that lot. Well, in 1973, I bet 2 or 3, she sold that lot for $20,000, and that's where the apartments are there on Boyd Mill Pike. So she was very proud of, considered herself a businesswoman, that she had kept the money, and she missed the bank failure in 26. But this is her in 1975. Elaine and I had open house when we moved in our house, and she was the grande dame that day, and she sat out on the back porch and entertained people. She knew everybody that was there. And so this book is dedicated to her.
And rightly so. Okay. And Rick used the D.G. Beers map of 1878 to plot most of these houses, moving from the western part of the county, Fairview, all the way over to Arrington and Triune. And that just makes perfect sense, because he was able to see who was living there then and to help identify some of these photographs. And if not the photographs, then at least the place and who was living in that house in 1878. So this map is a really great resource, and they're found in other counties as well.
I must say, this is not in the book, because there's no way that map would be reduced down enough. I put that here because it gives you some idea of how really fair I've been in the county. Even though I'm more interested in the western part of the county, but you see I have covered pretty much the whole county rather fairly. But this map is impossible to reduce down to get it in a 8.5 by 11 page. Okay, you ready to go? Yeah, this is yours.
As I mentioned, I began to see a lot of patterns. And of course, some of the log houses were remaining from the antebellum period when they were taken in the photographs in 1880, 1890, even 1900. But these are the two of the types that you will see, the folk types, the one-pen log cabin, and then the two-pen log cabin with the dog trot or breezeway. You'll see that, and in fact, we will see one right now. This is the Lynn's. Mr. Lynn's most important thing was his dog. Ms. Lynn's most important thing was her spinning wheel. But this is truly an iconic log, one pen with a loft. You see right up here, and I'll try to point these out on both sides for you, right up here, so you know that you've got a loft up there. This dominant chimney, and they did add some windows eventually, but that has the shutters, the complete shutters. And then you have just a little porch at the back, so very simple. And they were living there, how late?
Oh, that's probably taken about 1910. Yes. This place, I tried to give the communities of where these houses are located, and this is out on the Old Natchez Trace, past Bending Chestnut, and it's right at the Maury County line. And Smarden had a post office at one time. It was a very rural area, and of course, there's nothing there anymore when the Natchez Trace went through.
And here we have the two pen log cabin that I showed you in the sketch, with the enclosed doorway and the chimneys at either end. This one has one section covered in board and batten, and one section covered in weatherboarding. So, they did what they could do, what they could afford. And then we have a nice metal roof on, and then some boards covering here. But really, this type of house you're going to see a lot. Okay, and the two-story log house, built as a two-story log house. We'll see a few of those. And then the central hallway worked really well. They know it did in the log cabins and the dog trots there, and it worked well in the two-story, and it worked well in what we call the I house, which was built in frame or brick. And sometimes you have the two-story portico, sometimes you have the Greek Revival portico. This is the predominant style in the 19th century, not only in Williamson County, but in the upland South and even into the Midwest, and you see them in Texas as well. So this type of house all along. And here's one right here. And you see that it has the central entrance and the chimneys at either end, and the symmetrical, the 2 rooms above 2 with the hallways, same floor pattern on each floor.
The John Ed Lampley family is a very important family in the Craigville community, which is out Pinewood Road, and it's happened to be on Lampley Road. And I have a feeling that house is not standing anymore. I think it's been torn down. But John Ed Lampley had a store right on Pinewood Road and Lampley Road there at the intersection, and was an important figure in that area. Had a nice big family, as you can see, and it's at a rather nice home.
The other style of house that we see all over the county is the gable front and wing house. And we see it in several variations. Sometimes it's on a log house and they built a new gable front and wing room. Sometimes we see it as a second-story house, which we call the upright and wing house. So we'll see several of those, like this one right here, an upright and wing. See your gable front here, 2-story, and then your wing back here. So in this particular case, we've got a chimney of Carter's limestone, which is a yellow limestone that you see out around Fairview. And we saw it on several different houses.
Hillsborough all the way over. Now this guy's very interesting. This is L.D. King. And he was from Kingfield, like most of the kings in that area. But he did well. He married a Smith. And the Smiths, Vernville was known as Smith Springs before John B. McEwen bought all the land and built the hotel out there known as Vernville. But this is on Caney Fork Road. And one Sunday you want to take a drive, go out either through Kingfield down to Fernville, and when you cross the bridge, turn bear to the left, and it's about 1/8 of a mile. You can almost see it from there. But and that whole Caney Fork Road is one of the best scenic roads in Williamson County. The old iron furnace remains are there. But L.D. King was illiterate. He served in the Confederate Army, and he married well. And when he died, he had a large family, and he left a nice estate, considering a man that really the farm around his house was not very productive, but he was able to accumulate money some way. I'm not going to say how.
Okay. Yeah, this is a good one too to look at different things because we have the storm cellar or ridge cellar right here. Looks like I'm about to shoot Rick.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll get out of your way.
And you can see that this is I think we've got either a cat or a dog here. You see the pillars that the unenclosed foundation is sitting on. And a front porch here, some millwork on that, maybe a little bit of millwork up here at the top, and these chimneys above, and a little balcony with no railings at all, and kids maybe falling out, but
yeah, you see, he did not follow county codes when he built this house.
No codes on the King property. Come back. Okay. Love this. Love the profiles. Everybody is posed with their best profile to the photographer. And you wonder what they were thinking and why the photographer had them to pose that way. who knows? But they're dressed in their finest, it looks like, and the little boys with the bowler, straw bowlers on. But a great house, some nice wooden shingling, some nice millwork, elliptical arches here, your central entrance. And this is a 1910 house, built as a frame house. And, you know, there were a lot of sawmills in Williamson County, and this millwork began to be quite available and quite inexpensive, so people started putting it on their houses. It really dressed them up, and so this is a very fine house. And Mr. Green also gave the land for the Green's Chapel United Methodist Church.
J.C. Green, some of y'all may remember Toby Green that had the kitchen out on across West End there, but Toby's father is this guy on the end. That's Otto Green, and Herman Green's in the middle, and Oscar is the tallest one, and then the two girls on the other side, Lily and I forget what the other girl's name was. But J.C. Green, James Carroll Green, had a store right across the road there where Shoals Branch runs into Pinewood Road. And they had come up from Coldwater, which is down on what would part of the South Harpeth waterway, up to the ridge, Pinewood Road, and set up his store in 1910 and did very well. Herman went to Hillsboro and started the store, Herman Green's store there on Bailey Road and Leapers Creek Road. Otto went to Bailey Road and was a farmer. Oscar ended up with the home place, and Oscar was a hoot.
All right. I hadn't expected to find any of my family in here, but lo and behold, I did. I was reading this caption, and it said that B.T. Beasley was living in this place in 1878. That's my great-grandfather. And doing a little bit more research, I find that probably my grandmother was born in that house. So I was delighted to see this wonderful piece of architecture. And it's a 1.5-story log house with a breezeway and closed kitchen. It's got this side stoop now, and it goes on for a ways. So it's fairly spacious home, and it's still there.
Yes, this is known as the Luther and Rhoda Fox Wharf home, and they're both deceased now, and so I suspect this house will be sold and maybe already sold. But I think, when I was looking this up, I think the early part of that house was a Mayberry house, and then it maybe became a Prowl house, and then the Beasleys bought it, and then the Wharfs, and it's been in that Wharf family for a long, long time. But right, it's right on South Lick Creek. Just right across the road is the creek.
And this is another one that I'd never seen before, that is associated with my family in the 1878 map. And Mrs. Skelley was living there, and that was Mary Ann Beasley Skelley. And she was the second wife of my great-great-grandfather. And again, one of those primarily 2-pen log houses. You can always spot log houses by these tiny little windows up at the top and the loft, and also just by the general pitch of the roof. Has 2 chimneys, one at either end on the exterior, and this shed roof. But a very livable house. As you can see, they had quite a family and several dogs.
Yeah, Tom Davis had a store right at the corner where this house is located on Leapers Creek Road. That's going to be on the south side of Mobley's Cut. If you're coming through Hillsboro, you go through Garrison, then Boston, then you Mobley's Cut. Down at the bottom of the hill is this where you'd find Sulphur Springs Road that goes to Theta. So he was quite an important spot. And then, of course, when the Middle Tennessee Railroad came through in 1909, it went right beside his house and store. and it's right next to the creek. And the Davises were an important family, a very large family in that area in the 2nd District.
Okay, this is a wonderful, prosperous looking couple and their house with the nice, again, the nice balustrade here, beautifully done millwork, posts, and they have enclosed the porch. You can see here, you can see where the foundation stops there when they built on this new park. So you can imagine what the house looked like. It was just one of those rectangular houses with the central entrance and chimneys at either end. And then they made this little outshot room. Don't know why, maybe they just needed it. It might have been a mother-in-law's room, it might have been for a brother who came and lived there, whatever. They needed it, so they did it, but really fine looking house.
This house is located when you're on Mobley's Cut and go down what is called the Boston Theta Road. It's the road from Boston to Theta. You're in the watershed of the Carter's Creek, and their farm is like kind of the headwaters for that. And the Trimbles were a very prosperous family. They're numerous in that area. I was there this week on Monday. Paul Clements and Brian Laster and I went up to see Greg Murray, who lives just past this house. And there's several nice homes that we could have used in that village. They seem to be more prosperous on that Murray County side, even though this is in Williamson County.
I know the Murray County folks would be pleased to receive that.
Well, I knew it was you.
And again, this is a great log building, and then they've added another part of the house, board and batten, and you can tell that it's later. It's got this much nicer window cut into it, and a doorway, and they've continued to add stones and rocks, field stones probably, just to close in that foundation to keep all kinds of critters and such out, and just to make it maybe a little bit warmer too. But a wonderful log pen, one pen with a loft, and wood shingles. Lots of wood shingles we're seeing at this period. And then the end chimney on the original one then becomes the central chimney for the entire house.
This is the Hassel family, James and his mother. And you can see whole families were raised in small 2-room and maybe a sleeping loft. So it was not an easy life. This is again right around Mobley's Cut, which is south of Boston on the Duck River Ridge. Not an easy way to make a living up on that poor ground.
And here we have one of those gable front and wing houses that kind of evolved, and that's out around Mobley's Cut too. You can see that they used the porch a lot, and it was another room. We have the enclosed lot around the house, and the dogs being kept inside there while the folks are outside having their picture made. But yeah, you have this wing right here, and then this gable wing that really helped with the space. And board and batten all over it.
Now this is Mr. Henry Wharf, who had a rather large family. You don't see it here, but Mr. Caney Wharf, who was an important man in Franklin. His farm was where the administration building is now on West Main Street. But you wouldn't know that he was very prosperous in this, but the Wharfs and the Foxes have a good reputation of the kind of folks that can make things work. They can make a living on a rock. And some of their land was not very good, productive. But this house, I kind of think maybe is still standing. The road, when you go on the Leapers Creek Road today, is on the railroad bed of the old Middle Tennessee Railroad. And this house, I think, was facing the creek. And I think it's still there. It's right up from Davis's store.
Which is just reopened,
Yeah.
I understand. All right. There were a lot of people who just had nothing in this county and who worked at the sawmills, which was a really low-paying job. And either the sawmills or someone provided some housing that was hardly housing at all. But you can see that this family was proud, they're dressed well, and even though they're living in really humble conditions, they were pleased to have their photograph made, and they made the best effort. Those little girls are dressed beautifully. They have a corn crop out at the back, which I'm sure helped supplement their food. But there's absolutely nothing under this, and it's just, raw boards, just planks that have been nailed up there. And there's no windows. I don't know if there was maybe a flue, maybe some sort of heating, hard to know, but it was very dark, so obviously the chairs are sitting on the porch here because they just didn't want to spend a lot of time in there if they didn't have to.
This picture was taken, and there's going to be another one that you're going to see, and another one in the book, that was taken by Judge John Henderson when he was about 16 years old. Where this house is located, and the other one is where the city springs were that captured the water and brought it into Franklin. And Judge Henderson's cousin was the superintendent over that, and so he went out one day with his camera and he took pictures of the families that lived along Garrison. And it's marvelous because that's hard to believe that this was about 1917 in Williamson County. In the census, it says that Ed Scott was cutting timber, and at that time, Mr. Castleman had a sawmill up at Bending Chestnut. But that was really a hard scrabble living, believe me. And this is another family that was working. This is the Anderson family, and if you know Elaine Anderson, that's our county court clerk, this is her in-laws. And again, there's no windows, only 2 doors, maybe a sleeping loft since that roof is so steeply pitched, and they look like they're doing their cooking on the out there in an open fire.
I think they've got a good trigger finger.
Okay, that's good. But this is only part of the family. There was a rather large family, like as you can imagine. But this is right at Bending Chestnut, and this house was actually on Garrison Road. I'm talking to Elaine. This is in Peach Hollow, and this is also right off of Garrison. And this is really, if you know Bill Peach, this is his grandfather. And he had a store, and I have enlarged that sign there, and it's advertising the Leapers Fork Bank. And as you can see, their home in the back, this is right after the great tornado of 1909 that destroyed a lot of the homes there, and apparently it must have taken off the porch because you can see where the pediment roof has been replaced with a shed roof. The humble little store is just board and batten with a lean-to and a shed porch. Kindly make do. Probably didn't have $50 worth of merchandise in the whole store.
But those little crossroads stores were so important.
They were. That was part of the economy, yeah. Also on Garrison Creek, this is the Joe Jones and Maggie Thweet farm. And the little girl you see sitting in the lap, that is Margaret Locke. And she was the youngest out of this large family. And Margaret was the cook at Hillsboro when I went there. She was the head cook, and she was a marvelous person of managing a cafeteria. But I was interviewing her one day, and she is a survivor of the April 29th, 1909. And she told me the story that in this house that was her parents' house, that it was in the night and the storm came and the house started moving, and her father thought he was hearing something in the air, and he reached up and grabbed it, and it was Margaret. He grabbed her by the foot and saved her life. This family, you can see, this is the house the next day. It was totally destroyed, and just across the creek were the Marlins, and a mother and baby and 2 sons were killed. So that was a terrible storm. But a very handsome roof. Now look how neatly those probably handmade shingles are put up. And today, Naomi Judd lived, her house is right on top of where that house was in 1909. This is one of my favorites. This is on Pinewood Road, before you get to Macklin Hill, between the Trace and Macklin Hill. And this is Jane Cowan and Joe Cummings. And this picture was taken by Mr. Wiles, who was a well-known photographer in Nashville, and he came out and took this photograph, and Dr. Robert White used that in his book for school children. And when I was going to school in the 5th grade, we used the textbook, and I remember very well the chapter on slavery had what they called Uncle Joe and Aunt Jane. Today, this house still stands. Mrs. Taylor bought it in the early 60s and remodeled it and added a wing to it, and it's marvelous. And of course, this was kind of put in after we already had 100. I had to take out one to put this one in. But this is important because this is probably one of the earliest houses in the county. The Thomas Hart Benton family came here about 1800 and settled at Leapers Fork, which they were from Hillsborough, North Carolina. That's where we get the name Hillsborough out there. But this was their home, and this is the slave cabin. Now the home was torn down in 1900 and replaced with a framed house, but this slave house is still standing. It's right there on Bailey Road and Leapers Creek Road. And what's so important about it is it's really a 2-room, it's one big log room, but there is a board wall that divides the room, and there's a little staircase going up into the sleeping loft. But the important thing is, that I think isn't so exciting, is that the window, one window, and it slides horizontally, not up and down. And it's been, when they put the logs up, they hewed out a track for that window to slide in. And if you go out to the Hermitage, the first Hermitage had the same system of windows. And of course, the tin roof's been added, and the other chimney has now been added. Aubrey Preston owns this, it's behind his house now, and he has completed, that chimney had been, the rocks had been taken. You want to talk about that?
This is moving on through Hillsborough, another one of your upright and wing houses. And yeah, I mentioned to you that sometimes they would bring out the carriages and the buggies and their fine horses, which they have done in this one. And let me see, a few chickens in the yard. But we're all out here dressed in front of this very fine home. These gable front and wing houses, particularly the 2-story ones, the upright wing and houses, started appearing in the 1880s, and they were very popular, very stylish. They had a lot of room, they were comfortable, and you have them in towns, in the rural areas, all over, because they were just such an improvement, shall we say, in the first of the modern houses, in a way. So you had them built on up into the teens. Right before World War I, you begin to see other types of houses, and after World War I, certainly. but all over the place. And they seem to have been built well because there's a lot of them that are still around.
Let me explain a little bit about this picture. The couple on the right there, that is Clint Shaw and his wife and mother-in-law, Emily Prowl, and she lived to be 100. And then their neighbors from across the road is Lizzie Walker and Booker Hunter. Now Booker was in the Civil War. He went as a servant to one of the Hunters, and I think that's probably their son and daughter. But this was the old Hunter place. Henry Hunter was in the War of 1812, and he had a rather nice home there, and it burned, and Mr. Clint Shaw bought it and built this house. Clint Shaw taught school at Boston and Garrison, and so did his wife, but when they started the rural free route delivery, he was our first postman in that area, Route 6 it was called. So, and I know this is so, Miss Marlin, when I showed it to her, she said, "Oh, that's Uncle Clint." So that told me that my suspicions were correct. This is all right in the heart of Hillsborough. If you go to downtown Leapers Fort and where the art gallery is, that house set right there. And Calvin Leahy's father in the early 50s moved the house back and rented it out and built the filling station in front of it. And at this case, Mr. J.T. Sweeney is the living here, and he is the town blacksmith. And this is Irwin Sweeney, who was their nephew, and he is shoeing a jennet, which is a female donkey. But this is a very high-style house for the time, and I was in that house before they tore it down. It had 2 rooms, staircases in each corner, dog-leg staircase, so there was separate rooms upstairs. Very convenient and nicely built, and it was really a loss, but I guess we need the art gallery today.
You mentioned what a nice styled house it was. You see that we have the elongated windows and the doors with transoms, which were great for ventilation, certainly. And then we have the nice millwork, the scroll work here, and the brackets along, and this nice medium pitched roof here. I don't see a chimney. Was there a chimney on this?
Yes, there was.
Okay, on this side?
Yeah, on that side.
But about this time you begin to see fewer chimneys, or else chimneys built on the interior to accommodate wood stoves and for cooking and for heating too. And you also begin to see some flues appear rather than having your chimneys.
Which one you on? That one? Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. Dr. A.B. Porner, and we have a descendant in the room tonight, or this afternoon, but built this house in 1860. And we know that because that's the year he married, and he got some land and built this house. And it is a 2-story log house, or 1.5 stories, I guess to say, with the hallway. And this is his son, Robert Porner. And his wife is over on the end, and I think maybe a granddaughter, and that's his daughter-in-law. But when I went out to Hillsborough, Mrs. Hogan was living there, and then she sold it. And today, Pat McLaughlin, who is a songwriter and performer, owns it and is very proud of it. And that's a rather rocky area. Cedar, when you see cedar trees like you see there in that yard, you've got limestone right near the surface. But it's a good example of the typical home that was built in 1860, right before the war. This is up in Sweeney Hollow. This W.S. Waddell, did I say Sweeney Hollow? I meant Waddell Hollow. Up in Waddell Hollow, W.S. Waddell was a Confederate soldier, and after the war he settled up on Sugar Creek, which is today we known as Waddell Hollow. And this is his daughter Sue, and this was her home. And unfortunately, it burned right after her death. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, just
Yeah, sure.
because this is such an iconic, some of you have been to Cades Cove, and this rivals anything you see in Cades Cove in East Tennessee. It was just perfect log house, and you see that they attached this little enclosed area to the kitchen, the freestanding kitchen. So they had a very, very cozy, very tight log house here with the big chimney here that served both, and I think there was a chimney on the end of the kitchen too, of course. But anyway, these place names, Waddell Hollow and other places that we have, Chester Road and such, sometimes that's all that's left of these families is the place names and creeks and rivers and roads and such.
This is right across the street or the road from where Sue Waddell's house was, but this is the first Carter house. Francis Carter brought his family from Halifax, Virginia, County, Virginia, and settled up in Waddell Hollow, what was Sugar Creek at that time. And he had 2 slaves with him, and why on earth he didn't sell those and buy some good land? I mean, this area is pathetic to try to grow anything, but it has good water. Now, he was a tanner, so he needed water for his occupation. Now, the irony, I think, is his son, Fountain Branch Carter, grew up here, came to Franklin, he was a bootmaker, he had a store, he became a surveyor, and he built the Carter House. And the Carter House is very sophisticated architecture, and to think that a young boy grew up in a house of just 1 room, sleeping quarters on the second, and then there is a kitchen in the back and probably some sleeping upstairs above that. This is still it doesn't look like this today, it's been added on to, of course, but this house in 28 acres sold for over $1 million about 6 months ago. So, log houses sell, I guess. This is another family, the Boyd family came from Halifax County about the same time that the Carters came. And this is a good example of how a house evolves. You see you've got a 2-story house and you've got another, and then there's even an L in the back that is log. But the Boyds, of course, at one time, W.A. Boyd owned Boyd's Mill, and then he also was the one that actually built Boyd's Mill Pike that started down here on 11th Avenue and went all the way to Old Hillsborough Road. And you see the dog there seemed to be a very common sight on a farm. Michael McDonald was next to the last owner. Bert Crary and his wife Lisa lived there now, but Michael McDonald was there before. About 2 years ago, he went back to California. Anything else you want to say? Okay. This is another great example of a house. This is the Reynolds and the Reynolds family. We've got a descendant in the hall here tonight. But look at, they all have instruments.
Yeah, I want to know if that descendant plays.
Yeah, they were known musicians. The grandfather was another rural route to mail carrier. This is on Boyd Mill Pike, by the way. Sadly, we think this house has been torn down. There was great log room, I know, in the back. John Folks lived there for many years. And someone has built a big house behind it. And I guess it was in the way and they tore it down, which is a shame.
This is such a perfect example of people adding on as the family grew and as they needed more room. So you see your original right here, and then the gable front, and then another addition and another addition, And then there were probably L's at the back. I'm sure you can tell us, but you know, they just built on it as they needed to, and they didn't just tear down and start over. It just made do. And obviously, this family was very proud of their musical abilities and their car too. This is a photograph that I especially love because the livestock outnumbers the people in this one. And wonderful mules. I grew up with mules, and they were very expensive animals, more costly than horses for many, many years. But this house, like the one that you saw that was demolished by the tornado of 1909, has this really steeply pitched roof that dominates the house and covers the porch, and is really what you see when you look at the house. But underneath you've got, it looks like at least 2 entrances, perhaps 3, and it's up on your pillars. But again, a very fine house. It's got a nice limestone chimney, maybe 2, probably 2, because it is such a long house. And it's just a great photograph. I love these that tell stories.
This house in the early 70s was remodeled and really made more livable. Kay and Steve George were in here last night, and they were the ones that did that. And then they sold it and went to the Governor's Club. And then last year, the owner took a bulldozer to it and pushed it down. This home was built by a county sheriff, antebellum sheriff, was James Kemp Hughes. When I came to Hillsboro, the Davis family was living here, and they were renting it from Dr. Ballard, who owned the farm. And he really didn't do much to keep it up. And eventually, when Stephen Kay did a good job of they did add dormers, I think, on it to give some light to the bedrooms, but it suited. It was a perfectly acceptable house. And today it's gone. It's just a vacant spot. This is this house we know when it was built because Mr. Tears came here from New York in 1884 and bought the Wiley White farm between Southall and Hillsboro, and built this beautiful house. And the rock wall today, if you're on Southall Road, you'll see that rock wall and you'll recognize it immediately. But this house, tragedy struck again in the tornado of 1909, and it completely destroyed the house. And I've got a picture of that destruction, and I don't know why I didn't add it. But this is Mr. Tears in his old age, and he was, of course, very proud of his livestock. He was Bertha Mae Gathman's grandfather, and of course she was a big member of the UDC, and I was speaking to the UDC one meeting, and she was talking about her grandfather came here from North Carolina, but she said he didn't vote for Lincoln, he was a Democrat. So Mr. Tears is Democrat. Okay, go ahead. You want to talk about this? Okay, this is a good example. This today would be on West Harpeth Road, but it was part of the plantation of Thomas F. Perkins, who owned the Forest Hill. Many of y'all would know it as the Glen Ogleby farm, but Mr. Thweet, he's the old man there in the center, he was a Confederate soldier, and he came back and went to work for the Perkins family, and he was the manager. But you see, he lives in a pretty nice tenant house, doesn't he? And notice how decorative the porch, but it's basically a log house. It's just been gussied up. And notice the black family on each side. That was probably the cook and the yard man. But nice photograph. This is in Burwood. This is the old Aiken house. The Aikens were one of the prominent families out there. They had the store where Huff's store is today. And of course, Mr. J.B. Aiken was a well-known educator in Franklin. He taught at Franklin High School and also BGA. But this is a very nice house, and it's still standing today. You go right on through Burwood, and it's on the right.
You can see that it was built as that
Yeah.
upright leaning gable that I was talking about in 1885, right there in that period of time when these were so popular. It was built as that in a beautiful home. And I actually knew Vance Aiken, and that would have been the grandson. He worked at MTSU. I was very, very proud of his heritage here in Williamson County. Okay, you talk about this. This is Century Farm, the Beasley Sparkman Farm.
Yeah. This is now, when you've gone through Burwood, you've crossed over the Duck River Ridge, and you're going down Carter's Creek Pike, but you haven't reached the Maury County line. This is the Sparkman house today, Ollie Sparkman and Alice. Notice how the house has evolved. One part of it is log, and then it's been added. It had a Greek Revival porch put on it, and then later a shed porch. But inside the house has beautiful woodwork. It's got poplar paneling and chair rails. The mantels are reeded, so it's a nice house, and it's been in that family for many years. It is a Century Farm.
It is. That means it's one of the farms that has been in the same family.
Yeah. This house is one of my favorites. If any of y'all went to Franklin Elementary School and had Mary Campbell Burnett, this was her home place until 1946, when she got tired of driving back and forth to Franklin Elementary School, so she sold the home place and bought a house on Lewisburg. But this, you can see very easily that on the right there is the log building. That's the first. And out in the cemetery behind the house, Joseph Burnett is there, and he was born in 1800 and died in 1849. And he is the father of the family. Then W.W. Burnett was there. And this house is now for sale. And if I was a young man, I would sure like to take that on, because I know there's good woodwork inside, because it's the same mantels that are in the house across the street. The only trouble is, about 10 years ago, meth was made there. And so there's probably going to be some trouble there. But it's in a beautiful community, and it's a lovely house, and it just needs some care. Yeah. This is the Moran house, which is over on Old Natchez Trace. And this is Mrs. Moran, and her husband is Sam Houston Moran, and little Jeff Moran is in the lap. But this house is made up of 3 log houses. Behind that, when you go in that hallway where the porch is, there's a big room with the bedroom upstairs. And then to the left, behind that, is another log house. And then this room that you see here is a log house. It was the schoolhouse that was on Temple Road. And Mr. Moran brought it from Temple Road over to his farm and added it, and it became the dining room and kitchen. And it was a Century Farm, and unfortunately I think it has been sold.
But lots of things to see in that.
Yeah, there is. This porch you're going to see again, but when you're putting 2 rooms together, it's difficult. They came up with this small little make-do porch. This was a very common sight. I've seen this. This house was the Vaughn house, and it's on Sneed Road before you go up the big hill. I'm not sure that it's still there today, but on the home farm, which was next to the Moran place, they had the identical setup where there was a log house, and they added on another log house perpendicular to it, and you had to go out of one outside on the porch to get in to the next house.
I call these vernacular duplexes.
Yeah, that's what they would be. It couldn't be two families living together. A mother, the old mother, the daughter-in-law didn't want to live in the same house as her, so they had built the other room. That's a possibility.
I think those were done to keep peace in the family.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Talk about this one a little bit. You don't see these central gables that are really a Gothic revival style too often here, but I have seen them across the state occasionally. And if you imagine this house without the enclosed porch here, you see that it was a very, very symmetrical house with this nice Gothic revival central gable, set up on an amazing cellar, foundation, basement, really tall there. I'm not sure why they had that. I don't know if it was something to do with what they did at that farm or not, but a bit unusual. And then enclosing this, of course, you see the flue there, but these were out of pattern books. So some people would see these patterns of houses and they would want to build their house like this. The other thing is the chickens, which were usually the bailiwick of the farm wife, because she could sell eggs and get a little, and poultry, and get a little extra cash. And I know I have pictures of all of my grandmothers with their flocks of chicken or geese or whatever. So great photograph here of the house. Anything else you want to say? I believe that one's gone now too.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
This is another family house. So we have some descendants from this family. This is the Perry family. It would have been Joshua Perry Jr.'s house, and then his two children you'll see here is Mary Perry, or we called her Molly, and she married a Hamilton, and then this is Robert Home Perry. And this is their home. It's a log home. But one thing about Mary, during the Civil War, she started a diary, and it's one of the most detailed descriptions of what home life was like during the Civil War. All the men were gone. Sometimes they'd slip back at night to visit, but she does an excellent job in giving us an insight into what it was like on the home front. Unfortunately, this house, this is today it's on Sneed Road, and unfortunately back in the 70s the log houses were torn down.
Talk about this one, because when I first saw this one, I went, looks like an Irish folk cottage to me. And actually, I'm learning more about the McCutcheons, who were from Scotland. It's a very typical Scots-Irish or Scotland or Irish crofter's cabin. And they built it in brick here, but the style is just exactly what you would see in the British Isles. And then they built this later house, a two-story English hall and parlor house next to it, as they got a little bit more money together in the next generation. And it's so much like one that I was familiar with in Sumner County that I just couldn't believe it. This is the one in Sumner County, which was executed in stone, and the hall and parlor house built by the second generation fellow there. This is the Rogan house, and the stone cottage has been restored and moved to Bledsoe's Lick Historic Park. The English second generation house, built about 1820 or so, is now in the Ulster American Folk Park in Northern Ireland. But I spent a lot of time with this property, and so seeing this one just right here in Williamson County just made me do a double take. Okay, this is a beautiful gable front and wing pattern, but you see some Italianate influences in this one. In the arched windows, point them out on both sides, and the shutters, which were custom made to fit those arched windows. And then in your elliptical arches on your porch. And these are much steeper, almost Gothic revival gables, but just a beautiful home as you move on into the 20th century.
This house is still standing today. It's part of the Clearview Baptist Church campus right north of town on the road going to Brentwood. Ms. Eleanor Pewitt was living there when I first was in the house, and then she sold it in the early 80s to Clearview, and they started their church out of that building. Notice the nice fence, picket fence, and then notice that it's got the steps so you can get on your horse very conveniently. Say something about, this is a Buchanan and the wife is a McKay, and this house was built on the McKay property. I think it was probably built right after the Civil War when Enoch came back from the war. Miss McKay, I'm sure this family were members of the McKay Cumberland Presbyterian Church, which was right down below this house. There's a subdivision entrance there today where that church sat, but this is a beautiful, beautiful house. Oh, this house is on Mallory Station Road. About, if you know where the radio station used to be, that's about where this house was. This is John Price Owen and his family, and he came back from the Civil War and built this house. And it is, I think, really a fine, attractive home. He's sitting there, and then his wife and daughter is behind him, and of course the cook's over there with the white apron and the son. Sadly, they lived right near the railroad track, and the mother and daughter were killed by the train. And apparently that must have been a dangerous crossing, because later in about 1900, I remember reading in the newspaper, Review-Appeal, where Dr. Samuel House was going on a night call to deliver a baby, and he was hit by a train there. So the trains must have not paid much to railroad crossings, or they were responsible one. This is a great house. This was the home of Joe and Virginia Bowman. Jody grew up in this house, as did Collie. And this is the grandmother, Mrs. Julie Bowman, and this is little Joe and his brother. But again, notice the porch. Now, why you would do that, I do not know. But it works, I guess. And of course, you see there's a passageway there where the second steps, there's probably a hallway there, and then another room. I want you to point, yeah, you've got it, the swing set. And this was so common in this area as it was in East Tennessee where I grew up. Almost everyone had one of these, either on the porch, if the porch was big enough, or out in the yard under a tree, and it usually had a little roof on it so you could sit in the shade. But it was so nice to swing back and forth, and I'm glad that it's in that photograph.
This is one of those charming houses that you could spend all day trying to figure out how to describe it. And you could write probably 10 pages, and at the end you would just say, this was a nice vernacular piece of architecture. And here we have still coming this basic central hallway, 2 rooms over 2, hallway upstairs. But on this one you see that the chimneys are now interior rather than exterior. So that tells you that it's later property, and this one is actually frame, not log. And what clues you in on that again is those windows. They're not small, very nice full-size windows, so you've got a full second story up there. So again, lovely flock of chickens, just lovely.
This is the Eggleston family, and they were very prominent in that area south of Bethesda. And I'm pretty sure this house is maybe still standing. It's about the end of Bird Lane. But you see again, the cash crop for women were chickens and eggs, because you could take those to the store and swap them for sugar and coffee and baking powder and whatever. So that's a good example. I'm glad to put that one in there. This is on Flat Creek at the intersection of Glen Road and Flat Creek. And notice this beautiful stone wall and the steps. You first go up and then you turn and go up to the house. Those stone pillars that are the posts, those are still there. I was through there not long ago. And then you've got, of course, this beautiful porch with the millwork and all. And again, look what a marvelously roofed house. This is E.K. Smithson on the far right over there, and he was the merchant at Arno. The post office was in his store, so he was the postmaster for Arno. Many of y'all might know this, but Arno was named for the river Arno in Italy. That area petitioned, really it was the congressman probably said, give this community a post office, and they appointed E.K. Smithson. And so when they submitted it, it came back Arno, and it was because the guy that was filling out the papers in Washington was from Arno, the river Arno, so that's interesting. And the Jones are sitting on the other side, of course, with the dog in the yard.
Let me just say a word or two about the chimneys, which you see are very tall chimneys, and again, that steeply pitched roof. It's almost like some of your Tidewater, Virginia houses. And the other different thing is this nice 9/9 pane window. It's the only window. The other two are entrances here with your transoms. That one doesn't really have a transom though. But it's not symmetrical, and that bothers some people, but that's the way it was, you know. But you've got these nice elliptical arches, and so great house. Okay, another gable front and wing house, upright and wing house actually, stone chimney, and up on stone pillars, and was where, Choctaw?
Yeah, Choctaw. This house is still standing, and it's between Cross Keys and Flat Creek when you take that road, and it's right at Choctaw, which was the school community. This was the old McCall house, and in the early road books it refers to McCall's Gap. So it's that kind of gap in the ridge, Duck River Ridge, between Cross Keys and Flat Creek. At the time this was made, I think this picture was made, was the Trices. Mr. Joe Trice, I think, grew up here, and after he died, Colonel Hensley Williams had the property, and then when he died, this has been sold. I kind of think this this wing here is actually log. I think that's what the Colonel said.
And you can tell that,
yeah,
that the gable front is added onto it just by looking at the roof lines and such. So that's one of those where it evolved from an earlier house into something a bit more modern looking. And I'll let you tell them about the cove, because that's...
This is down in the cove, and that is really at the south end of Arno Road. Arno Road, if you look on that 1878 map, it's not there. To get into the cove, it was kind of difficult, but it's the headwater, the creek, Grove Creek starts there and runs all the way down through College Grove into the Harpeth River. But this area is kind of, they were an isolated community. They were the Whites, the Biggers, the Wilsons, the Rickmans, and they all intermarried. And there's actually been a book about this this whole area. A lady that was doing her master's at Vanderbilt, no, Peabody, I guess, wrote a story. And sadly enough, she changed the names. You can't, if you have to be real careful to figure out who she's talking about. But this family are the Grahams, and you can see the passageway there goes right through the house. And this house is still standing. The Clarksons remodeled this house and lived in it back in the early 70s. And it's been passed on to another family today. But you can see, again, there's probably 2 log rooms, and then this front part has been added. Let you talk about this one. Oh, you and
All right. I love this. I just love it because, yes, we're going to make our house look really important by using Doric columns on the dog trot. And they did, you know? And they're very, very proud of their house, and you sometimes see this, but my question is where did those Doric columns come from? It made those, but yeah, it's this log cabin and the breezeway and then the nice columns and such. But you know, people do what they want to do in their houses. That's okay.
The gentleman there came here after the Civil War to better himself, and he married this lady, Ray, and bought just one house, supposedly, 1 log room, and then he added on the next one as the family grew. Now, supposedly this house was located on Hatcher Road, which is a connection between Arnold Road and Bethesda. And I drove through there one day trying to find it, and I couldn't find it, so it's either off the road or it's been torn down. But it is an interesting house, no doubt about it.
You know, occasionally you find little gems that are not like any other houses. And this is the case on this one, where you have this wing, and then you have this polygonal room that they added on. You know, Octagon's houses became briefly popular in the 1880s, 1890s, and I think that might have been what they were going for, but it's not really an octagon. But it's you also see some of these similarities in Louisiana in what they call garçonnières that are attached to houses, and that's basically the brother-in-law's wing. So it makes me wonder if maybe this wasn't built on and goes back, and I'd like to get in this house just to see how this was put together. But a marvelous house, and it's got these lovely engaged columns or pilasters down through here, and each one of the supports is just one piece of cut stone. And then you have these nice elliptical arches here. So really a marvelous and unique home.
Again, this is located somewhere on Arnold Road. I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember passing it, but it's in the Arnold community. I know by I looked up the deeds on this family. This picture came from Chad Gray told me. He said, you know, have you been to the Antique Mall out on Murfreesboro Road? This has been 5 or 6 years ago. And he said, there's a whole box of pictures in there. And he said, I think you would know these. Well, Mr. Pinkston had died, lived over here on James Avenue. And apparently when they cleaned out his house, whoever was doing it just picked up the box of pictures and took it to the Antique Mall. So I went through it, and they were daguerreotypes and tintypes and a lot. What are you doing?
Didn't mean to do anything.
That's okay. Just keep working. Go back.
Okay.
One more.
All right.
One more. There. So anyways, I bought the box, and it has got some beautiful photographs in it. But this one, it was labeled and told me who these people were on the back. And there's nothing more pathetic than to get a good photograph and there's no identification on it. That's happened more times, and there's nothing you can do about it because the people that could identify it are either blind or dead. This is a great, I would have loved to have been in this house, but this is a great example of how something evolves. Now this started out as a nice house. You see it's a 2-story. Look at that limestone chimney. That's about as good as you'll find anywhere in Middle Tennessee. It's logged, no doubt. And then, of course, the next generation was more prosperous, and they added on onto it and added a nice porch. Sadly, this house burned not too many years ago. The pipes were frozen, and the guy got up under the house with a blowtorch and caught the house on fire, and down it went. But this is the old Merritt house, and it was between Goose Creek and Paytonsville. I love this house. I needed a picture of Mr. Ollie Lillard, and so I went to Miss Lillard and I said, did Milton have a picture of his grandfather? So she found one and gave me this, and it's just wonderful. And you look at this house, it's very humble, just probably one room, and you can see how well you've got a roof there, and then up above, look at that cornice. They really did some fine decorating there for such a humble house. The steep steps, and then of course the log smokehouse in the back. And you can almost say every country family had a smokehouse because that was their way of storing meat. Many of them had a storm cellar or a root cellar to keep the potatoes and the vegetables in, and turnips and things like that during the winter. So yeah, anything you want to say about this family?
I would just say that if I were teaching a workshop on reading photographs, would be one of the photographs I would use, because there's so much, even to the little table with the little fringe tablecloth on it, in dishes, which says they probably took tea or ate out there because it was so dark inside, and just everything about this and the people, such stories that weave in and out of this particular photograph. And this one is, again, your basic house, the log section, the enclosed breezeway, but you've got here nice side lights on your door, some Greek Revival features, including this pretty massive pediment and porch here, and your columns, which were obviously painted to show up. So they've made a really nice outdoor room here on this otherwise, basic house with the central entrance that we've seen so many of. But that was their way of making their house look a little different from everybody's houses. All right. These photographs of former slaves and their dwellings are so rare, and it's just amazing to find these and to see what they lived in.
I was fortunate enough back, maybe 10 years ago, I was told that the health department had a scrapbook that the nurses did back in the 20s and 30s. And so they were kind enough to let me take them and scan the photographs. And in that album was this picture of the house and this couple. And I found a newspaper article about this couple, and they both claimed to be over 100 years old, which I doubt. But look at the house, such a humble building for someone to live in. And you can see they've got a stone chimney there, but also there is the flue that's coming out, and then there's one over there probably in their kitchen. But this is 1932. That was on the picture when I took it out of the album. And look at his clothing. I mean, you talk about patches on top of patches. But these were humble folks, and up in such an age, he was unable to work and bring in any money, and there was Social Security hadn't come in yet, so they were sad. This is a house that is probably, it's probably one of the best unrestored houses left in Williamson County. And it's right on Kirkland, and it is log, and it looks as if the family just walked away. But now you read up there, this is the Newt McCord house. Newt McCord was one of 14 boys. Now think about that, ladies, having a family of 14 boys to have to clothe and feed. But anyways, this is a good example of 2 log pens, a hallway, and then the additions in the back. And of course it's sitting just like that today. It's in that area is a rather rocky area, so I don't see how they could have been very prosperous. I don't know how they were able to get a good garden to feed many children. But anyways, that is a treasure, and I hope it does not disappear. It was there 6 months ago. You want to say something about this house?
Yeah, the Absalom Scales house is a really, really beautifully executed house. You can see high stylized pediments and brackets. And Absalom Scales was a well-known landowner in the Eagleville, this is in Kirkland, in that area. He built one of the earliest houses in what is now Rutherford County, just around Eagleville, a big 2-story log house. And so you have some really fine brackets and pediment, decorations, nice windows, this very heavy surround over the door and molding, and just beautifully designed house. Not a large house, it's probably a good L to the back, but you have engaged columns here at the end. And this house is still there. It still pretty much looks just like this. If you're going through Kirkland, you look behind the filling station, that little concrete block filling station, and there it is, sitting back there. Yeah. Not in too bad a shape, really. Yeah. Whoops, sorry. Okay, this is the Cochran house, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the 1878 map that we keep talking about, this was part of Westview, which was the plantation of Samuel Perkins. And this house is there, and behind that house it says slave quarters. Of course, there wasn't slavery in 1870, but the houses were there, and this was the overseer's house. Now, the family that's living there right now, that's Mr. John U. Wilson, the little boy there, and that's his mother and father. And the black family you see in the back, those are the Ewings. And Miss Louise Patton was kin to these boys. Henry Ewing is the boy holding the pony, and I think he and Miss Patton were first cousins. So she told me. But this is a very well-executed house. It has a beautiful foundation of stone. And it's right south of where 840 goes through today. Sadly, 840 goes right over where the plantation house sat. That was probably the most expensive home ever built in the 19th century in Williamson County. This is the Baker house, and it's right at Triune, right near the crossroads. If you have the Rural Scenes book, this same family, we have a picture of them in the back, and there's a barn, and there's a wagon, buggy, and they were farmers as well as merchants. The crossroads at Triune was a very prosperous area because it had traffic on the Nolensville Road and the Murfreesboro Road. And that community, Triune, was a pretty strong economic area. This is a wonder. This house is actually on the National Register, and it sets up near Sumner's Knob, which is off McCandless Road, right near the Rutherford County line. But Abram Green came here from North Carolina, and in 1814 built probably this 2-story house, and then his son added on the additions. It has been, no one's lived there in many, many years. As you see, they weren't living here then. And the McCandless family owns it today, and I've just got to get up there and check it out. This is right in right in Arrington. This was Dr. Pascal's house. It's no longer there, but you can see, again, it's got a kind of a funky porch, when you've got them where they're insets and angles that fills in between that wing and the gable end that comes out. But this is the family of Dr. Pascal. His brother's the little man there in the back, and Bo Stewart's family lives in his house today on Lewisburg. This is the Osborne family, and this is still in the family. It's a Century Farm over on Osborne Road. Perry Osborne is the owner today. He has reworked the house. Big family, as you can see, and again you can see how the house has been added onto. The earlier log is over to the left, and the Osbornes are kind of a peculiar family. Some of them spell it with a Z, and some of them spell it with an S, and some say UR, and some say OR, and some have an E at the end, but they're all out of the same clan. It's called peculiar. And Perry won't mind if he sees this. But this is the Jackson house, and it is kindly, let's see, it's near, before you get to North Chapel Road on the left-hand side, there's a cedar thicket in there, and I think that house sits back in there if it's still standing. But you see here, they're re-roofing the house. So they've got the board up there where they can stand and redoing the boards. And this is rather nice. You look at the columns there's a log house underneath that, but look, in time they have really put on the dog and putting some nice columns that are boxed in and got some molding on them. You ready? Okay, this is a good example of the have and have-nots. The Holt House plantation over on Crockett Road was probably the last really working plantation as such. They on up until the mid-30s maybe still had the ex-slave families living on that farm. And you can see here's the great brick Greek revival that was finished in 1860. And then you have the homes for the workers. And look how the wide cracks between those logs. The roof. It could not have been a very pleasant place to live, but that's the best those folks could do. And this is on Concord and Bluff Road, and this is the Josiah Steele house. Even though Josiah had died, his wife Mary had contracted to replace the house that was built, that had burned. The two-story part that you see there is 20 by 30 cedar logs. It had brick chimneys. It was paneled with poplar beaded board inside. The logs had never been exposed. There was a little walkway into the next room, which was the log kitchen. There was a big stone chimney at the end. And in 1973, I saw this house for the first time and found out that Dr. Mackey of Trevecca College owned it, and so I wrote him a letter, asked if he would be willing to sell it, because it was in bad shape, as you can see here. Well, I didn't hear anything. So at Thanksgiving, Lane and I went up to Knoxville and came back, and in the mailbox was a letter from Miss Mackey, and she said, "I'm sorry in the delay of answering your letter, but Dr. Mackey has died, and yes, I want to talk to you about selling the log house." So Lane and I one night went to Nashville on Harding Road and met Miss Mackey, and no time we had an agreement, $1,200, and I could take anything I wanted out of the place and just leave what I didn't want there for them to burn. So soon after that, I started going on weekends and taking the paneling off very gently and bringing it to to Daniels Drive and storing it under some tin. And then finally, it's probably about June, we started tearing down the log building. We took the kitchen down first, and then on July 4th, we had a cherry picker with a truck and Uncle Bill's hay wagon, and we loaded the 30 feet long logs, and by noon we were coming down Main Street on the way to South Hall to unload the logs. So yes, this is our house that we've been in since 1975. But the history of it is very important because you see the picture here of Dr. McMurray. He was born in this house. He served in the Civil War, and he also wrote the history of the 20th Tennessee, which is a very collectible book for those interested in Civil War history. And now we're back to the beginning. This house is on the road again between Boston and Theta. And this is the McKee family. Gene McKee and his family are standing out there getting their picture taken, and in the meantime the wife is delivering Luther inside. This picture came from one of Luther's children, so I take it to be true. But just look what a marvelous house this is. Notice the big dinner bell, and it's got up high so that the sound will be able to penetrate the woods. And then this marvelous fence, look how high it is, and it's probably slats that are woven with wire, and then of course look at the base to keep varmints from getting under it. Particularly chickens were bad about, of course they could fly over the fence, but this kept the livestock out of the yard. And with this, we have ended. Now you see, you haven't seen all the pictures. There are actually 100 homes that we've included, and last week, Caneta went through and pulled out those because he said there's so many just alike and we don't want to keep you here all night. So I think for $20 you're going to get a good collection of period photographs of houses of the working folks in Williamson County. Are there any questions?
Did most of the families build the house themselves?
I think there were men, like I know the Josiah Steele house, Mrs. Steele hired some men to build it, and there's a lawsuit in the courthouse records that in 1832 she refused to, 1831 she didn't agree with them, and so they took her to court. She had contracted for $500 to build that house, and they apparently didn't do what she wanted them to, but she lost. She had to pay them. So there is, I think, professional carpenters, and then, you know, farm men can usually do anything they put their mind to, and they probably, either if they didn't build the house themselves, they surely helped with it. Any other questions? Yes?
Were there any kit houses?
Any what?
Kit houses.
Well, I don't think that came in till later. The Sears and Roebuck houses, we have some of those in Franklin. I dealt with those in the West Main Street, because there's some houses on that street that are from a kit. But this is way before Sears and Roebuck. Any other questions? Well, you know, it's been a pleasure. I'm so glad you came. And I'm so glad I've had some help. If you want to buy the book, it's $20, and I'll sign it. It won't cost you anything.